They told him to stay at his post, to keep his head down, to follow the new rotation orders from the consort's office, even if it meant pretending not to notice. But when the royal guard overheard Camilla planning to quietly replace Prince George, Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis, not with William's blessing, but with her own bloodline, he didn't just stand there, he walked straight into that private meeting and stopped everything. Before I show you exactly what Camilla was proposing behind closed doors, and how one royal guard brought the whole scheme crashing down, make sure you hit that subscribe button with notifications on. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Because what you're about to witness wasn't just about protecting 3 children. It was about choosing truth over silence. The corridors outside the green antechamber were too quiet for a Monday morning. Sergeant Rowan Ainsley adjusted his bearskin, eyes drifting along the painted cornice above him. 15 years in the Coldstream Guards had taught him when silence meant serenity and when it meant something was being buried. Today's silence hummed like a locked door with too many secrets behind it. The updated security rotation had placed him here just past 9. Unusual not for the location, but for the vagueness. The clipboard read, "Her Majesty's Private Review, attendance restricted. No clearance roster, no visitor logs, no further detail." He watched silently as arrivals filtered past. Not one wore household uniform. Not one bore the insignia of Prince William or Princess Anne's offices. Instead, he saw surnames that didn't belong in Windsor. Shand, Lopes, Fellows, familiar in the wrong way. Camilla's family. The first woman, tall, sharp heels clicking on marble, barely glanced at him. Her pass flashed burgundy trim and a golden C insignia in the corner. Not the royal cipher. The consort's temporary monogram. Rowan's gaze narrowed. From down the corridor, Sergeant Evans appeared, a junior posted near the library wing. He paused just long enough to hand Rowan a folded comm update, murmuring under his breath, "Didn't think inheritance law meetings were her domain." Rowan didn't reply. Both of them knew this wasn't a policy review. The energy was wrong, like something ceremonial being dissected in secret. A moment later, 2 palace clerks emerged from a side elevator, wheeling stacks of red folders. Rowan's eyes dropped to the embossed titles. Hereditary Portfolio, Draft 1, Status Ledger, Proposed Amendments, and one simply marked Youth Succession. All bore a seal he didn't recognize. No royal insignia, no king's emblem. Just a stylized hybrid of oak leaves and heraldic lions. Ornate, political, unofficial. Rowan straightened, shoulder brushing the marble panel behind him. His rifle remained upright, his gaze fixed forward, but his instincts were already screaming. He checked the king's official calendar on his secure wrist display. No mention of any scheduled review, no delegation, no succession committee. Yet behind that door, Camilla's inner circle was gathering, without the king, without Anne, without William. Whatever was happening in there wasn't supposed to happen at all. There were some things you only noticed after years in the guard, where sound travelled, which doors were hollow, how voices carried, if the air ducts were old enough and the floors just right. Sergeant Rowan Ainsley didn't need a blueprint. Just beyond the green antechamber, a carved alcove concealed a small ventilation panel, an access shaft for heat regulation that hadn't been touched since George VI's reign. Most guards never stood near it, but Rowan knew it by heart. He also knew the way sound curved through that duct and bloomed out softly on the other side. He wasn't eavesdropping, not really, not at first. He'd merely shifted position for line of sight when he heard Camilla's voice, clear, clipped, composed. Public image is perception. The line of succession can be presented as flexible. Rowan didn't blink. A man's voice responded, older, smooth, the cadence of someone who'd done PR for decades. There will be questions about sidelining Charlotte and Louis. Camilla. Questions, yes, but not answers. We emphasize wellness, overwhelm, emotional pressure. Frame it as protective. Modernization by way of safeguarding. A third voice, female, enthusiastic. "And your grandchildren, ma'am? They've tested well with the public. Their image metrics outperform the traditional line in younger demographics." Rowan's breath slowed. He shifted slightly, careful not to rattle the leather strap of his rifle. "Camilla again. George will still appear when needed, but the ceremonial titles can be reorganized. Shared representational roles. The crown modernized once, it will again." The air around Rowan tightened. Then came the line that made his stomach turn. "Princess Charlotte's visibility will taper off by autumn. A quiet transfer of patronages. No announcements, just diminishing relevance." An aide laughed softly. "A soft fade. Easier on everyone. We're not abolishing the monarchy, just pruning it." And then Camilla, with the tone of finality. "We don't need a Diana narrative playing out in miniature. One future is enough. Her legacy cannot be allowed to echo through Charlotte." Rowan's hand moved slowly to his radio belt. With practiced motion, he toggled the incident buffer, activating the passive recording loop. Not surveillance, not breach of duty, just proof. He caught one final phrase before a chair scraped back and voices hushed. "The Public Transition Initiative launches this afternoon. Let's finalize the draft titles." Silence resumed. But inside Rowan's mind, every alarm was blaring. This wasn't modernization, it was erasure. He didn't have time to step away before the door opened. A single figure emerged. Mr. Langford, one of the consort's senior aides. Trim suit, sharp haircut, clipboard pressed to his chest like armor. He walked with the ease of a man who knew which doors unlocked for him and which lives didn't matter if they didn't. He didn't look surprised to see Rowan standing nearby. "Sergeant Ainsley," he said coolly, eyes flicking down the corridor before returning. "Her Majesty requests no corridor presence during the remainder of the briefing." Rowan didn't move. "Green antechambers listed as Class 2 proximity post, rotation every half hour." Langford's smile was thin. "Some topics aren't for security ears. Take your break, now." The words landed soft. The tone beneath them wasn't. Rowan nodded once, mechanically, and stepped off post. He didn't leave the hallway. Instead, he rounded the corner and lingered by a display case of coronation china, the polished glass reflecting just enough of the antechamber doors for him to watch who came and went. A maid passed, with her eyes downcast. One aide glanced both ways before ducking into a side room. Langford remained by the door for a moment longer, then leaned in and whispered something through the crack. When he turned back, his smile was gone. It wasn't until Rowan made his way toward the south corridor that another guard, Sergeant Yates, caught up beside him. Yates didn't look up, just muttered low as they walked. "They're rotating us again. Hourly shifts, mid-briefing switch-outs. Orders came from the consort's office." Rowan frowned. "They ever do that for House of Windsor meetings?" "Not unless someone's trying to clean footprints as they make them." Yates peeled off before anyone noticed, vanishing down the east hall. Rowan stood alone in the light. He realized then he wasn't being moved for logistics. He was being removed from visibility. They were isolating the institutional memory, clearing out witnesses, swapping out guards who knew what the corridors were supposed to look like. He tapped his radio twice, confirming the buffered audio was still secure. There were moments when protocol was no longer a shield, and this was one of them. The air in Windsor's archive wing always carried a faint chill. Paper dust, floor wax, and secrets. By the time Sergeant Rowan Ainsley stepped inside, that chill felt sharper than usual. He wasn't supposed to be there. The security rotation log said corridor observation, but instincts and 15 years of service told him that whatever was happening in the green antechamber would ripple here next. The archives were where legacy got rewritten first. At the end of the aisle, bent over a trolley of thick binders, stood Mrs. Pemberton. She'd served under the late Queen since before Rowan joined the Guards. Cardigan sleeves rolled back, reading glasses perched halfway down her nose, the picture of harmlessness. But her eyes flicked up the moment she saw him, and her voice came out quick and nervous. "Sergeant, you shouldn't be here." Rowan lowered his voice. "Then you already know why I am." She hesitated, then looked around to make sure no one was near. They've requisitioned the succession files, not copies, originals, signatures, seals, birth records, everything. That's never authorized without the sovereign's countersign, Rowan said quietly. I know. She swallowed. But the request came through the consort's office. They called it a heritage restructuring initiative. I've never heard of such a thing. She handed him one of the binders she'd been told to repackage. Across the cover, stamped in new gold ink, Hereditary Portfolio, Transition Draft. Rowan opened it carefully. The pages were fresh printouts of constitutional excerpts, annotations scribbled in blue pen. Most were harmless, outdated clauses, ceremonial line adjustments. But one paragraph in the middle made his pulse slow. Transition of ceremonial heirs to discretionary representatives under reallocation directive of the consort's office. He looked up. Discretionary representatives? Mrs. Pemberton nodded grimly. Meaning anyone she chooses. They've rewritten the roles as appointable positions. He turned another page and froze. Halfway down was a list of proposed successors to public-facing duties. None of them were named George, Charlotte, or Louis. Instead, 3 unfamiliar surnames, all connected to Camilla's extended family. But it was the next section that made his blood run cold. A detailed timeline. Charlotte's patronages, the Children's Literacy Foundation, the Youth Art Initiative, all marked for graceful transition by Q4. Louis's ceremonial appearances, reduce frequency, cite educational priorities. Even George wasn't spared. His future roles were labelled subject to performance review and public sentiment analysis. Performance review, for a child born to be king. Mrs. Pemberton turned another page with trembling fingers. Look at this. They've drafted press releases, all dated for the next 6 months. Each one frames it as the children's choice. Princess Charlotte has expressed a desire for privacy. Prince Louis will focus on academic pursuits. They're writing the narrative before it even happens. Rowan scanned the mock headlines. Sympathetic, gentle, lies wrapped in concern. Pemberton's hands shook. They told me it was for digital archiving, but they're reprinting the lineage pages, removing the king's insignia entirely. Rowan's jaw locked. He closed the binder, sealing it with a flat hand. This isn't archiving, he said. It's a coup on paper. The old archivist looked up at him, voice trembling. Then I pray someone still remembers what loyalty looks like. Rowan did, and he knew before he even left the room that someone would have to stop it. The barracks were silent when Rowan returned. Afternoon light filtered through the high windows in long amber shafts, cutting across lockers and folded uniforms. Even here, the quiet felt staged, like the palace had collectively stopped breathing. He sat on the edge of his bunk, gloves in his lap, boots still laced. The red binder from the archive sat inside his mind like a weight. Across the room, his commanding officer stood reviewing a clipboard. Captain Mortimer, tall, blunt, a man who lived by the sentence, "It's above your pay grade." He glanced at Rowan without raising his head. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Ainsley." "I might have, sir," Mortimer sighed. "Don't get poetic. That wing's always been more politics than ghosts. Let it stay that way." Rowan didn't reply. The captain lowered the clipboard. "Whatever you've heard, whatever you think's happening, you're not the first to hear whispers in Windsor. But the guard doesn't pick sides. We guard the chamber, not the throne." Rowan's voice was level. "What if the chamber's being emptied behind the door?" Mortimer stared for a moment, then said softly, "Then you stand a little straighter and say nothing louder." He left without another word. Rowan sat still for a long while, then finally reached into the back of his locker and pulled out a small envelope, yellowed with age. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. E.R. Elizabeth Regina. Inside was a single folded note, written during her final year. She'd given it to him privately after a cold November vigil. He hadn't read it in years. Rowan. A guard's silence protects the body, but truth guards the soul. In days ahead, You may be asked to ignore what you see. If it threatens memory or misuses duty, then it is not silence I expect of you. It is sight. E. He folded it carefully, returned it to the envelope, then pulled out his regulation earpiece and tapped the recording buffer. The conversation with Camilla was still there, 2 minutes of clear, damning certainty. He stared at his reflection in the locker door, the red tunic, the bearskin hat, the white leather strap across his chest. A uniform made for ceremony. But today he would wear it for something else. Not to observe, to intervene. By the time the clocks in Windsor chimed 3, the public transition initiative was already underway. The meeting was staged inside the Green Salon, a rarely used reception room lined with velvet walls and sun-faded portraits of forgotten viscounts. It had once held royal christenings, intimate diplomatic teas, even Queen Elizabeth's private readings of new legislation. But today it had been quietly reserved through the consort's office under the label Heritage Strategy Session. Sergeant Rowan Ainsley stood 1 floor below, leaning against the brass post of a marble stairwell, pretending to check his routing schedule. In reality, he was watching the upper corridor in the mirrored pane across the hall. 3 aides had entered. Then Camilla. Then a legal clerk from the Privy Council. No royal press. No representation from William's office. No Anne. No Charles. Only Camilla and her circle. Rowan tapped his earpiece. Ainsley, corridor rotation. Requesting confirmation of Green Salon access clearance. The reply crackled a second too long. Then, no rotation scheduled. That room's not on today's internal list. Which meant one thing. They hadn't logged the meeting. That gave Rowan grounds. He moved. Crossed the upper hall. Reached the service panel beside the north vestibule. A narrow side entry used by musicians and palace catering staff. Behind the velvet curtain was a second door, half concealed, normally locked. But Rowan entered his old officer override code. Click. The door opened on silence. Inside the Green Salon, 7 people sat around a long walnut table, red folders open. A whiteboard displayed a branching chart of ceremonial titles, most circled in blue, others crossed out in red. Near the bottom, 3 unfamiliar surnames had been written beneath the label. Future Engagement Faces. Camilla stood near the fireplace, speaking calmly as if rehearsing a press release. Public affection follows access. George will appear on calendar holidays. Charlotte will be eased out through educational commitments. Louis will phase him out quietly, out of sight, out of narrative. Rowan didn't wait. He stepped fully into the room. Every head turned. The legal officer nearly dropped his pen. Camilla went silent mid-sentence. The aide beside her took an instinctive half-step forward, then stopped when Rowan's eyes met his. The room held its breath. Rowan's voice was even, but it cut through the silence like polished steel. "Ma'am, these proceedings violate standing Royal Ordinance 42, Hereditary Integrity Statute." Camilla blinked once. Her lips parted. And then she said what only someone too confident would ever say to a soldier in uniform. "You're overstepping, Sergeant." Camilla's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. She turned slowly from the fireplace, eyes narrowing as she faced Sergeant Rowan Ainsley directly. Her navy blue coat dress caught the light from the arched windows behind her, gold trim flickering like medals never earned. "You're overstepping, Sergeant," she repeated. "Leave before I have you discharged." Rowan didn't move. He stood tall, centered beneath the vaulted ceiling, one hand resting firmly against the strap of his rifle. "With respect, ma'am," he said evenly, "my commission was signed by your late mother-in-law, and it defines my place as where legacy stands weakest. I believe I'm standing in the correct room." A rustle swept the table as Camilla's aides shifted, exchanging glances. One, the legal officer, opened his mouth, but Camilla raised a hand. Her tone turned sweet, almost pitying. "You misunderstand. We're merely exploring administrative options. Nothing has been finalized." Rowan stepped forward 1 pace. "Then why was the meeting unlogged? Why were all security personnel rotated hourly with no central clearance? Why does every folder on that table bear an unofficial cipher? She stiffened. This is above your classification. He nodded once. So is rewriting succession law without the sovereign's input. One of the aides, tall, clipped accent, snapped. That's an accusation. No, Rowan replied. It's a citation. Royal Ordinance 42. Any attempt to modify ceremonial heir visibility without approval from the heir apparent or sovereign constitutes a breach of hereditary protocol. That carries audit authority. Another silence. Camilla's face shifted, calculation replacing composure. You're basing this on what exactly? Corridor gossip? Documented evidence, Rowan said evenly. Archived files requisitioned without proper authorization. Press releases drafted for events that haven't occurred. Timeline projections for removing children from public visibility. One of the aides closed his folder abruptly. Camilla's voice turned to ice. You've been somewhere you shouldn't have been, Sergeant. I've been exactly where my commission requires me to be. She took a step closer, voice dropping to something almost intimate. Do you understand what you're risking? Your career? Your pension, your reputation, all for what? A misunderstanding about administrative planning? Rowan didn't flinch. I understand that 3 children are being erased from their own legacy. That's not administrative. That's betrayal. The word hung in the air like smoke. Camilla's jaw tightened. Then her composure cracked just for a second. Her voice dropped, sharp and controlled. You're just a guard. Rowan's reply came without hesitation. I'm a witness. From within his tunic, he removed a folded piece of paper, the note from Queen Elizabeth. He didn't read it aloud. He simply held it up, letting the seal and the royal cipher speak louder than words. Camilla's eyes locked on it. Rowan took one step to the edge of the table and laid the letter down gently. Her Majesty foresaw this possibility. She prepared for it. The aides around the room didn't speak, but their posture changed. Shoulders drawn back, hands withdrawing from folders. And then Rowan tapped the hidden toggle beneath his epaulette, a signal hardwired into the guard's crisis response system. A soft chime echoed in his ear. Internal override triggered. Palace security had just been alerted. Prince William's liaison would have received the notification instantly. The aide nearest Camilla noticed Rowan's stillness and leaned in to whisper something into her ear. Camilla straightened, mask back in place. You've made a mistake, Sergeant. Rowan didn't blink. Not yet, but you have. The doors to the green salon opened again. This time Rowan didn't turn. He already knew who it would be. The room, however, reacted as if the air had shifted. Prince William entered first, dressed not in regalia, but a tailored charcoal suit, the lapel pinned with the heir apparent's golden cipher. Behind him came Princess Anne, stoic in a black riding coat. And trailing them both was the king's private secretary, face unreadable, leather folder in hand. Camilla didn't speak at once. William closed the doors himself, walked to the end of the table, looked briefly at the note Rowan had placed there. Then, "Continue, mother." Camilla's voice returned in that smooth public tone she wore like perfume. This meeting was merely a forward-facing policy review, a modernization outline. I wasn't aware it required your presence. Anne cut in without ceremony. Modernization doesn't require secrecy. Camilla turned her gaze sharply. We've already discussed that not every draft requires consensus. Charles agrees in principle. William raised a hand slowly. The room fell silent. He reached into the folder the secretary had carried in and removed a printout, laid it down on the table with the finality of a verdict. The top of the page read, Buffer recording. Incident capture. 14:27 hours. Below it, a transcript. Camilla's voice. Her aides' voices. The phrase, the young heirs will be eased out quietly. William looked at her. Nothing accusatory in his tone, just pure bone-deep disappointment. Have you heard this voice lately? He asked quietly. Camilla stared at the page. Her jaw tightened. She said nothing. William pulled out a second document. This is a requisition order for Succession Archives, signed with your cipher, not countersigned by the king as required by law. He placed it beside the transcript, a third page. Draft press releases, dated 3 months into the future, all framing my children's withdrawal from public life as their own decision. He looked up. They're 9, 7, and 5 years old. When exactly did you ask them? Camilla's voice returned, measured. Those were exploratory drafts, scenario planning. Nothing was decided. Scenario planning, Anne repeated coldly, doesn't require removing the king's insignia from official lineage documents. William placed one final sheet on the table, the document Mrs. Pemberton had shown Rowan. The future engagement faces chart with Camilla's family names at the bottom. Tell me, William said softly, at what point did you plan to inform me that my children were being replaced? Anne stepped forward now, tone razor sharp. Tell me, ma'am, who gave you the authority to alter public air visibility? Who signed off on removing 3 of your step-grandchildren from ceremonial lineage? Camilla's mouth opened, closed. Her advisers sank into silence. William's voice was steady. There is a line we do not cross, not because tradition demands it, but because integrity requires it. He turned to Rowan. Sergeant Ainsley, please confirm, did you witness attempts to restructure hereditary designations? Yes, sir, Rowan replied without hesitation, and I intercepted documents to support that. Original archives were removed and replaced under temporary cipher. William nodded. Then you have upheld your oath. He turned back to the room. From this moment, all hereditary deliberations are suspended. All files returned to Crown Office. Access revoked for any party not in the direct line or Royal Household Office. He looked again at Rowan, not with ceremony, but with something rarer. Trust. Stand by me, he said. You did the right thing. The aides didn't argue. Not one. Even Camilla, who had held the room like a sovereign just minutes before, stood frozen behind her chair. Her gloves were folded neatly on the table, untouched since William arrived. Now they looked like props left behind by a character being written out of the play. Prince William didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice, low and measured, carried the authority of someone who no longer needed permission to act. All succession documentation under review, he said, is to be returned to the royal household by end of day. Originals only. No digital scans, no duplicates. The royal archivist will oversee the transfer. He turned to the secretary. Deliver that order to the Crown Office within the hour. Yes, sir. William faced Camilla, but this time he didn't raise his voice or lower it. He simply told the truth. Legacy isn't a committee decision. It's not a trial balloon to be floated behind closed doors. It belongs to memory, not management. Anne stepped forward now, her gloved hand resting lightly on the back of Rowan's shoulder, not as command, but solidarity. She looked around the room. Reinstate all original hereditary protections, seal the green salon, and for the sake of this institution, stop testing the patience of history. Camilla didn't respond. Her hands were still, the tendons in her jaw taut. Whatever argument she'd prepared died between breath and timing. The power she had relied on, quiet influence, whispered arrangements, had found its limit. A prince had drawn a line, and this time the monarchy obeyed him. The aides began gathering papers, quietly, obediently. The red folders, once weapons disguised as drafts, were closed without a word. Rowan stepped back toward the doorway, giving them space. His orders were finished, but he remained posted. Present. Still. One of Camilla's advisers paused before exiting, glancing at the Queen Consort for instruction. She gave none, and that was the final statement. As the last of them filed out, Anne leaned closer to William and said something too soft to hear. He nodded once, turned, and held open the door for his sister. Rowan waited until they were gone, before finally allowing himself to exhale. Camilla lingered for a moment longer, alone now. She looked at Rowan, and for the first time that day, her voice was not commanding. You've cost me more than you know. Rowan didn't flinch. With respect, ma'am, you were never meant to own it in the first place. She left without another word. Windsor breathed again. By evening, the silence that once cloaked Windsor's corridors had shifted. It wasn't louder, just clearer, cleaner. Like something old and unseen had been scrubbed away. The hum of routine returned. Distant heels on polished floors, the occasional hum of page boys ferrying files, the low rhythm of order restored. Sergeant Rowan Ainsley walked the East Gallery alone. No escort, no formal orders, but no one stopped him either. The royal household had already issued the memo, circulated through internal channels only, no press release. All hereditary review initiatives suspended indefinitely by order of the heir apparent. Future ceremonial restructuring to be approved solely by the sovereign or designated successor. It didn't name names, but everyone knew who had written it, and why. As he passed the carved arch near the nursery wing, Rowan slowed. From behind the tall oak door he heard laughter, high, unbothered, the kind only children could produce. Two voices, Charlotte and Louis. Playing, arguing, perhaps both, life continuing as if the day had never risked erasing them. He paused only for a breath, then recentered his tunic, realigned the white belt, and adjusted the tall black bearskin hat that crowned his silhouette. The uniform was just as it had been that morning, but it carried something different now. Not ceremony. Witness. He resumed his post beside the marble column at the foot of the stair, silent, visible, and exactly where legacy expected him to be. Some days, the job required nothing more than presence. Other days, presence was the only thing keeping history intact. Today, standing still, had rewritten the future. Should a royal guard ever defy orders, if the monarchy itself is being rewritten? Was Sergeant Ainsley right to crash that meeting, risking his entire career to protect the heirs? And if you were in his boots, would you have stepped through that door? Drop your answers in the comments. We read every single one. Hit like if you believe legacy should never be handed over quietly. Make sure you're subscribed with the bell icon turned on so you never miss a story like this. And share this video with someone who still thinks a royal guard's job is just for show. Your next stories are already appearing on your screen. Watch those next, and we'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place, with another story you won't believe is true. Until then, stay sharp.